What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com down there. We like magic, you know, by now. And today, we're shooting that poison arrow. I actually already did this deck a little over a year ago, but ever since I put it out, it's been one of the most requested decks for me to revisit. Especially lately, I've been getting a lot of requests for me to look at this deck again. And since we put it out last time, there's been a rotation, and we're in a completely new format that I actually think the deck will look really, really good in. So, let me show you Green-Black Poison Arrows Redux. It all starts with 4 copies of Pathway Arrows, a 1-mana equipment that you never hear anybody talk about because it's kind of bad. The card is fairly bad on its own, that's pretty obvious, but combined with Deathtouch creatures, the card can get out of hand quickly. And yes, it totally works that way. Deathtouch creatures don't have to deal combat damage to another creature to kill it. It's just any damage that a Deathtouch creature deals. So it can totally hit something with Pathway Arrows for 1, as long as the equipped creature has a Deathtouch, you're killing it no matter how big it is. I don't have to tell you, that's pretty good in a format that's mostly defined by aggro and mid-range at this point. You know, Green-Black counters and Mardu aggro are the decks to beat, and a deck that basically kills a creature every single turn, and if you have multiple arrows out, you can do it multiple times a turn, is pretty good. So now you know the basic game plan: Pathway Arrows plus Deathtouch creatures. So I've already shown you arrows, let me show you the other half of the equation. We're basically just going to stock the deck with a bunch of creatures with Deathtouch, and in this one we got 22 creatures that either have Deathtouch or can get Deathtouch in some way. So let me start with the 1-drops here. We're going to play 4 copies of Narnam Renegade and 4 copies of Gnarlwood Dryad. But both of these are pretty much no-brainer, auto-includes as far as I'm concerned. We need a bunch of 1-drops so we can get on board as quickly as possible and start equipping things to Pathway Arrows as quickly as possible, too. Not to mention that, like, 1-drops with Deathtouch are just kind of good right now. Like, there's a lot of 1-drop creatures people are playing, whether it's like Inventor's Apprentice or Toolcraft Exemplar, Thraben Inspector. So, you know, it's just nice to achieve parity with them on turn 1 almost no matter what, because we're going to be able to block and at least trade with literally anything they play. We also can't really start like killing stuff with the Pathway Arrows until turn 4. So we need some things in the early game to gum up the board and make it kind of disadvantageous for our opponent to attack, or in some cases block. So we need a bunch of 1-drops, and these are obviously the best ones we can play. You know, Narnar over here can be pretty big if we play him after a creature died in combat or something. That's always good. And Gnarls Barkley is just solid. You know, we've got like 7 different card types in this deck, so Delirium is not unheard of at all. Into the 2-drops here, and I'll start with the one I'm kind of most excited about. We are definitely going to make room for 4 copies of Gifted Aetherborn in the deck. Young, Black, and Gifted. A lot of people are making room for this guy in the Green-Black Counters deck, the Green-Black Delirium deck, whatever you want to call it. This is actually, in that deck, a really good 2-drop to lead into a turn 3 Rishkar if you don't have a snake. You know, you play your Rishkar on turn 3, you'll get a big Rishkar and a 3/4, you know, Gifted Aetherborn. So, that's a good play too, but in this deck, it's still great. You know, 2 mana, say, turn 2, 2/3 Deathtouch lifelink. That'll really help keep us in the game. Hello, Julie, where you been? Just, it attacks well, it blocks well, just super stellar creature right here. This is probably one of the best Deathtouch creatures in the entire format. I feel like we definitely have to play this dude. Sticking with the 2-drops here, I'm going to play 2 copies of Dhund Operative in the deck, and if you've never heard of this card, don't worry. I think a lot of people haven't heard of this card. I covered all the spoilers from Kaladesh, and I don't seem to remember this guy. He slipped under my radar, but when I checked Magic Cards info for like creatures with Deathtouch and Standard, this dude popped up, and I was like, huh, you're really good. So we're playing him. It turns out that the creature is pretty awesome. As a matter of fact, you know, 3 power for 2 mana is always good, and Deathtouch is on theme. And we're playing like 8 different artifacts in the deck, including obviously Pathway Arrows, which is the whole point of the deck. So we're going to have an artifact at some point, and having a 2 mana 3 power dude with Deathtouch is just a super good deal. But obviously it's not guaranteed to be turned on, so I'm not going to play a bunch of copies of it, but it's still pretty solid. Now, to help turn on Operative, we're going to play 4 copies of Narnam Cobra, another Narnam card. All kinds of Narnam in the deck. But in any case, Cobra obviously, too, does not always have Deathtouch, but just 1 green mana to turn it on is worth the benefit that I think it brings to the deck. A 2-power, 2-mana creature is at least on curve, so, you know, we don't feel too behind in playing it. Although in this standard, a lot of people are playing 3 and 4 power creatures for 2 mana. But still, we're technically not off curve in playing this. And it's an artifact, which is pretty cool because when we put it in the graveyard, it helps Gnarlwood Dryad get Delirium, so that's worth considering. And also, obviously, it's an artifact for Dhund Operative. So there's a few different synergistic reasons to choose this card, and it really helps out the budget. It's only like 3 to 5 cents right now. So it's on theme. It's got a few things going for it synergistically, so let's give it a shot. All 4 of them, and it has worked out. We're going to play 2 copies of Gonti, Lord of Luxury, possibly the best creature in the entire deck. I've been really heavily considering playing a 3rd Gonti in the deck because there's been lots of times that I wouldn't mind playing a Gonti on top of a Gonti and just losing one to the Legend rule to get the card advantage, because the card advantage is so insane. And people are playing so many good cards in this format right now that, like, you're bound to get something awesome off of a Gonti. And pretty often you'll get like a Fatal Push or an Unlicensed Disintegration or some vehicle that you can play, or even a Planeswalker a lot of the time. So, you know, sometimes you'll get a counter spell off of it that you can just play whenever you want to for whatever mana. And not only are we getting card advantage, we get to take away one of our opponent's best cards. So, like, I think people are sleeping on Gonti. Just, he's really... the card is good, you guys. The card is very good. Let's close out the creatures with the biggest Deathtouch creature in the format. 2 copies of the Gitrog Monster in the deck. Now, the Deathtouch on Hypnotoad has always felt slightly redundant. Like, he's already a 6/6, right? Like, he can take out a Torrential Gearhulk and not die. So, like, he's already huge, but... you know, he's a Deathtouch guy. He's on theme. He provides card advantage. He's flood protection in the late game. Like... it's just good. By the time you play this guy, you'll be running really low on cards, and you'll be able... I mean, the deck runs on like 3 or 4 mana anyway, so you'll be able to comfortably toss a few lands over a couple of turns and be okay with it for the card advantage, because once you get this late in the game, drawing 2 cards a turn is really good for this deck. Not to mention, like, the best thing about the card is that we're playing a bunch of really small dudes in the deck. Like, the biggest power is, like, just the 2 or 3 power, and we have to work for that on, like, Gnarlwood Dryad. So, having just a huge 6-power dude that closes the game out for us is really important. We're going to play 11 spells to close out the main deck here, and I'm going to start with 3 copies of something we haven't seen in a while, but used to be a popular card, and that is Dead Weight. Now, we're seeing a lot of Mardu Vehicles decks in the format right now, and this takes out virtually any 1-drop that deck wants to play, so that makes it pretty decent in and of itself right there. Plus, this gives us an enchantment to put into the graveyard for Gnarlwood Dryad, which is a synergistic reason to play it. But, you know, if you had a couple of extra bucks, it would probably just be straight up better to play Fatal Push in the deck, all things considered. But, you know, as it stands, we can pay 10 cents and have a highly synergistic thing with Gnarlwood Dryad that is fairly effective against all the small creatures in the format right now. And I want to point out again here that we're not destroying stuff with Pathway Arrows until turn 4 at the very earliest, so we don't want to get run over in the early game. I think it's important to play cheap removal like this to ensure that doesn't happen. As far as removal goes, I'm also going to play 4 copies of Nature's Way in the deck, which is obviously pretty cute. Now, there are some good reasons to play this. This allows us to not lean so heavily on Pathway Arrows. You know, we got a bunch of Deathtouch creatures. This gives us another way to reliably take out creatures with them without having to, like, trade on blocks or something like that. So, I think that's pretty cool. And giving Deathtouch creatures vigilance is actually kind of sort of important. You should be able to swing with them and still leave them up on defense if they don't die on blocks or something. So, that's actually pretty cool. Being able to threaten both offense and defense with a Deathtouch creature is sometimes kind of important. So Vigilance is not a throwaway ability. And even sometimes the ability to give something like the Gitrog Monster Trample is relevant. So there's a few good things this card does. But if you got a few extra bucks or something and you don't feel like playing a 2-mana sorcery that makes you have another creature out, then you could always play like Grasp of Darkness, or again, even Fatal Push would help. Now, I'm going to play some protection for our guys because they're all really small, and there's a lot of, like, shocks and Fatal Pushes running around, so we've got to protect our dudes for what it's worth. So let's play 2 copies of Blossoming Defense and 1 copy of Heroic Intervention. Now, at first, I was just playing 3 Blossoming Defense and calling it a day, and Blossoming Defense is obviously really good. It's just the 1 mana. It allows us to protect our dudes from instant speed removal, and it allows them to survive combat situations they normally wouldn't survive. So all of that's good. We'll definitely play some copies of that, but Heroic Intervention can be a serious blowout sometimes, and it's main deck protection from things like Fumigate and like the Jeskai Saheeli shell. So I think Heroic Intervention is actually worth at least the one of, because it can lead to these ridiculous situations where we can just swing in with all of our guys, they think they're safe, boom, Heroic Intervention. Or conversely, they think they're safe to swing in, and Heroic Intervention can just completely ruin their whole game plan. So Heroic Intervention is a blowout just enough that I think it's worth one main deck copy. And we're going to play more on the board, too. That card is just really good when it works. And to finish off the main deck here, I'm going to spend $5 on a single copy of Nissa Vital Force here. Now again, we're playing a bunch of small guys in this deck that we hope to trade on blocks until we get like a Pathway Arrows or something. So we're going to be putting creatures in the graveyard, definitely. And again, all of this instant speed, like small time removal going around, like Grasp, Fatal Push, Unlicensed Disintegration. There's just so much targeted removal. Shock. All of our dudes are super susceptible to shock. So I think that having something that can bring our dudes back from the graveyard is pretty important. And Nissa can do a lot of stuff in this deck. She can basically be like a 5-mana 5/5 haste sometimes, which is really good. Just another big creature is nice. And also, she can come down, tick up one, and immediately untap a force so that we can have like Blossoming Defense up. So that's pretty cool too. Not to mention that her ultimate is really easy to get to and is another way to just get a bunch of card advantage in the super late game, which this deck, again, kind of wants a lot. It doesn't want to draw dead lands late, and Nissa can really help out with that once she ultimates. Now, I'm going to play 23 lands in this deck, and I am going to play some amount of Evolving Wilds, even though this is just a 2-color deck. This does some things in this deck. First of all, it's a land in the graveyard for Gnarlwood Dryad. That's a thing. And it's good with the Gitrog Monster. You put an Evolving Wilds in the graveyard, draw a card. So that's good synergy right there, too. And it helps fix our mana when we're not playing like any dual lands, because that would cost money. But number one most important thing I want to point out about this mana base, and as far as upgrades go, is that if you have a couple of bucks, the very first upgrade you want to make is Blooming Marsh in this deck. Because right now, if the keen-eyed observer will notice that there is absolutely no way in this mana configuration to go from like turn 1 Gnarlwood or Narnam Renegade into turn 2 Gifted Aetherborn, which is a play we really want, but we also don't want to spend $30 on a play set of Blooming Marsh. So if you got them lying around or you got 30 bucks on you, definitely go get your Blooming Marshes today when you build this deck, because having that play available to us is very important, and we don't with this current mana base. And yes, if you had a couple of more bucks, you could also play Hissing Quagmire in the deck, because not only is it a dual land, we need those, but it's also got Deathtouch, so things that are on theme are fun. Here's the sideboard right here. We're going to finish off the playset of Deadweight and play a number of Murder in the deck. Now, Murder is important because it gives us a lot more protection against the Saheeli combo. And again, one more time, we're not killing stuff with arrows until turn 4, so having an instant speed 3-mana kill a thing is just important a lot of the time against these, very early developing boards with like Rishkar or Heart of Kiran or something like that. So, having instant speed removal too against vehicles is also very important. We're going to play one more copy of Blossoming Defense and 2 more Heroic Intervention, because again, if we know we're playing against Fumigate, Intervention is just so good. Transgress the Mind is really good against Control, which we don't have a whole lot of options against in the sideboard, but Control isn't really too much of a scourge right now anyway, but Transgress is very good against them. It can also help out against Saheeli combo, so there's that. Ruinous Path is in there specifically against Planeswalkers, because when they get on board, we may have a problem if they have protection for their Planeswalkers. So I want something that just targets and kills Planeswalkers in the deck. Natural Obsolescence and Natural State to finish it off here. I will split the playset here so that Natural Obsolescence can take out Scrap Heap Scroungers and not have to worry about them coming back for a while, hopefully. And Natural State can take out Heart of Kirans for just the 1 mana. And here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 59, which is actually not too bad. If you'll notice, the deck doesn't do anything poorly, really. It has like a 4, but like it doesn't do anything god-awful, to be honest. And that's really impressive for a deck that cost only 25 bucks. But in this format, you heard me, $25. But in this format right now, having a bunch of like small Deathtouch creatures is actually really good. Don't get me wrong, the deck has its foibles, like it really doesn't like to see like a turn 2 Heart of Kiran. That's a problem. Or it doesn't like to see Planeswalkers that we can't get through damage on. That can also be an issue. But against most of the aggro and mid-range decks in the format, deck actually has pretty good game right now, you know? We can gum up the board early, make it hard for them to attack in and get damage. The longer the game goes on, the more chance we have of drawing pathway arrows. And at that point, we can just start killing a creature every single turn. And even if they play a creature every turn, we're often going to out-creature them over the course of 3 or 4 turns. So, you know, we can just get this kind of advantage where we overwhelm them with our small guys, or we can just hold them off, pick off a dude every turn with an arrow, and then eventually play like a Gitrog Monster and just swing in with a 6/6 a couple of times to finish things off. And the deck just kind of plays like a lot of decent cards, you know? Like, despite the fact that it's a Pathway Arrows deck, it's based around like a dumb card no one ever talks about, we're still playing Narnam Renegade, Gnarlwood Dryad, Gifted Aetherborn, the Gitrog Monster, Gonti, like... We're playing a lot of, like, pretty solid cards in this deck right now. And that's not all. What, we got Nissa in the deck. Blossoming Defense has proven itself before. So, like, the deck actually plays a bunch of solid cards, despite the fact that it's kind of a silly deck. But that is all that I have got for now. But I've got a couple of things that I want to go over, what I want to do next time here. A couple of people were still excited about Esper Aggro, and I'm thinking about doing that next, but I'll give you a couple of other choices of stuff that I've got almost ready to go. Now, the first thing is a white-black mid-range deck, which is actually looking pretty stock, to be honest with you. I was not thinking the deck was going to be great, but it sort of plays like a control deck. It's got tons of amazing removal and a lot of really good stuff high up on the curve that can close the game out. So white-black mid-range is actually looking pretty dope right now. So if you want to see that, I'll bring it to you. And the other day I asked you, like, what do you guys want to see? And somebody in the comments said Grixis Dynavolt Tower, and he got like 30 likes on it and like a bunch of people like yes that replied to him. So I'll give you a chance on that. Do you want to see Grixis Dynavolt Tower? I've pretty much got it ready. But for now, I'm tapped out. If you enjoyed the content, like the content, hit the thumbs up button. You can also sub if you're new, hit the bell, ring my bell. That would be awesome if you did that. So now, then you'll get to see whenever I put out videos. It'll be right there in your inbox. Like, hey, it's Strict Better on TG. Put out videos. Oh, check that out. So yeah, do all YouTube stuff is all I'm saying. You, hey, Julie, you're up. Did I wake you? I'm sorry, baby. You are so cranky. You are just the crankiest, baby. Anyway, we will see you all later. I'm Dev. This is Julie from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Are you still... Yeah, you're just the sleepiest.